Okay, so far we have implemented get user details and create user. Now the next app is update user details. So let's talk a little bit about this method. To update user details, an HTTP request will need to be made, and that HTTP request will need to contain the user details that we would like to update. So first difference between create user details and update user details is that when we are creating, we are sending HTTP post and we are sending email address and password. Now to update user details, we are not going to send HTTP post request anymore. We are going to send HTTP put request, and we will need to provide the ID of the user that we want to update. Let's say this is the ID of the user that we want to update, and that ID is not provided inside of the JSON body. It's provided as the path variable here. And now we are including the JSON body with the details that we want to update. So we provide first name, for example, last name, and I usually do not include email address in this request. For updating email address, I like to have a different flow because email address will need to be confirmed. But again, it's up to the needs of your application. You can include email address here as well, but I remove it from this request. And I usually remove password as well, but again, up to the needs of your application, you can include the password and update user password in this request. The update user details will need to be performed only if user has authenticated or the user has signed into your application and they have the JSON web token value, which is being used in request authorization. So to send this request, you will also need to go to headers and then provide the authorization header with the bearer and the token value. And we will do that when our update user details API call is ready, and we will be testing how it works. But at this moment, let's switch to the body of this HTTP request and update the REST controller and the put mapping method to handle this HTTP request. So first of all, we want our method to be able to support both XML and JSON. So I will copy, consumes, and produce from the post mapping so that for update user details, we can send user details in either XML or in JSON, and we can accept back either XML or JSON. Now, the next value that we need to copy is this path, because we will need to provide user ID as a path variable. So I'll put it at the beginning here and I will add a comma. So with the path / user ID, we are reading this value here, and with the consumes, we are specifying that this body JSON payload will need to be either in XML or JSON. Now let's go back to the body here, because this method will need to accept the request body, the JSON or XML payload. We will need to provide the request body annotation with the details that we want to update. And we do already have the user details request model. So I'll simply copy it and paste it here inside of the update user method as a method argument. And I will also need to create one more argument to read the user ID. So we do have it inside of the get mapping for the get user details, and this is how we read path variable. So I'll copy this path variable annotation and I'll paste it inside of my update user method. Okay, so my update user has two method arguments. One of them is to read the ID of the user from the path of our URL request, and the second one is the request body, the body of HTTP request that contains the user details we would like to update. Now we'll return back user object, and we already have the model for that, user REST. So I will replace string with that, and the rest of the code here is going to be exactly the same as inside of the create user. So I will copy it and we'll paste here, except one little difference here is that our service method will need to call update user rather than create user. We don't have this method now, where we'll need to go and create it, but the return value that we are creating is of type user REST. So we'll return back user ID, first name, last name, and email. and then we are creating a user data transfer object. We are copying properties from user details request model into the user data transfer object, and then we are calling the update user details, update user method, and giving it user data transfer object as a method parameter. And then once the user details are updated, let's rename this also to updated user, because user service returns back an object of user data transfer object, a data type. So we will take the user data transfer object and we will convert it back to the user rest, which we can then return back. Okay, so I think our method is ready. All we need to do now is to go into service layer class and create update user method.